I'm going to start with Leviticus 18 and 20. I'm really just going to do 18 because Leviticus 20 is essentially a parallel to 18, almost identical in content. And what we have in Leviticus 18 and 20 is what's commonly known as sort of the sex laws, basically who you can and can't have sex with and how. And virtually all of them, and I just picked one at random here, virtually all of these laws are relatively reasonable by our contemporary standards as well. Mostly it's don't have sex with your family members. My suggestion, just as a sort of passing comment, is that the rationale behind these laws may be less, it's a moral affront, and more that when you have sex with family members, issues of paternity and inheritance get confused very quickly in a way that the Bible is really consistently careful about not letting happen. I've said this in other contexts, but there's constant, enormous concern with making sure, because inheritance is, patrilineal, we need to know who the parent of any. Parentage is really deeply important. If families start getting interwoven in these ways, it becomes pretty confusing. In any case, the family-based sex laws, I think, are relatively straightforward. It's worth noting, I didn't pull this one up, but one of them says, you can't sleep with a woman and with her sister, which, again, is not like a totally unreasonable, like, ethical principle, except that, of course, we have cases like, Jacob, who a couple of books earlier does exactly this, which is a reminder, probably, that we're not always reading the same authors when we're reading the Bible, and that different authors can have completely different takes on what is and isn't appropriate, and perhaps when in history things were and weren't appropriate. So after the family laws, we get, still within the same chapters, we get a slightly different set of laws that seem to be picking up some of the same themes. So we start, first of all, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness, which is this chapter's sort of euphemism for sex, while she is in her menstrual uncleanness. Okay, like on its own, that wouldn't be such a strange thing. But here I want to point out that this is a different concept from what we have in the first half. In the first half of Leviticus, in the P section, it doesn't say you can't approach. I mean, it says that you will become impure if you have contact with a menstruating woman. But it doesn't say not to. It just says you do, and then you take a bath. But here we're already seeing, right, a little bit of a distance from what's in the first half. Here, okay, no, you're not allowed to. We're forbidding it. There's a evidently impurity is now something that is increasingly something we want to avoid rather than simply a fact of life. You shall not have sexual relations with your kinsman's wife. Okay, yes, adultery, bad, fair enough. Notice though, and defile yourself with her. Again, sex is naturally defiling according to the first half of Leviticus, according to the P material. But this suggests that, it's a particular kind of defilement, like a moral defilement that comes with adultery, which again, broadening our sense of what impurity is. If defilement here is the same word as impurity. Okay, so menstruant, adultery, and then just sort of thrown in for fun, no child sacrifice. Here using a biblical expression about not giving your children to sacrifice them to Molech, who is sort of a shadowy kind of deity in the ancient Near East and in the Bible. But in any case, the euphemism of give your offspring to Molech is to sacrifice them, even if you're sacrificing them intending to do it to Yahweh, to Israel's God. Okay, no child sacrifice. That's not a sex law. That has nothing to do with sex. So I'm not here to solve that problem. I will simply call out the slightly odd placement of it. But I'll also call out, for whatever it's worth, the fact that if people weren't sacrificing children, at least sometimes, you probably wouldn't have to say this. Now you might say, so what are you telling me, that like all the adultery, all the like sex laws are also, yeah, the answer is probably yes. But for sure, I mean, there's actually plenty of evidence both within the Bible and from archaeology that child sacrifice, even if not a common thing, was a known practice. And this author wants nothing to do with it. Even though, for example, if you were to read the book of Judges and you get to the story of Jephthah sacrificing his daughter to Israel's God without anybody complaining about it much, you'd recognize that this author's particular antipathy toward child sacrifice may not be as widespread and as universal as we might think. After this comes really like the big one here. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. This is still to this day and age, in fact, probably more in this day and age than ever before. This is the verse that justifies anti-gay views and arguments from from the kinds of people who make them while holding up a Bible. Right. This one's easy. Right. This is one you see on like posters held by the people who hold posters. Lots of folks try, scholars, lots of scholars even try to soften this. Right. They try to say it doesn't really mean homosexuality is wrong. Okay, yes, this one particular sex act is forbidden, but they're not saying anything more broad than that, which may be true. But in part, that's because they didn't have a concept of sexuality, and like a gender identity and sexual preference, and like homosexuality wasn't a category as such. So the act that they're describing here, that's the thing that existed for them. My point here is to say the Bible very clearly, to my mind, prohibits at least homosexual male intercourse. If you want to make it narrower than that, if you want to broaden it from that, it's prohibited. And there's nothing, there's really almost nothing we can do to say, yeah, but maybe it meant something different. This is one of those cases where we have to say it's in there, right? It's in the text. And our job is not to take it out of the text. It's to say, okay, now what do we do once it's there? I'm not going to answer that question. I'm just going to put it out there. The last law in this section is no bestiality. Again, fair enough. Now, before we move on, I want to think about, we've got all of these sex laws and the child sacrifice stuff, and I want to think about the rationale, the framework for these laws, for all of them, including the family sex laws. The rationale for Israel not doing it that's given in the text is not just this is morally bad. It's not just God said no. The rationale at the beginning, before the laws, is you shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, where you used to live, and as they do in the land of Canaan, where you're about to live. In other words, and then we get all these things that you're not allowed to do. The idea from the text is we don't do these things because the Egyptians and the Canaanites do these things, and like that's, they're bad, and those people who do them are gross, and we want nothing to do with it. Now, we know historically that this is not at all the case, right? The Egyptians and the Canaanites weren't, committing all of these, all these like sex law violations or sacrificing their children more than anybody else. What we're seeing here is not a historical truth, but rather a rhetorical move. It's interesting, of course, Israel is surrounded by lots of various countries, right? Not just the Egyptians and the Canaanites, but the Arameans and the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Edomites. And the Ammonites and the Edomites and the Moabites and the Arameans are all in Genesis said to be related to Israel, right? They're all associated with the cousins and brothers and nephews and stuff. All of this Israel surrounding people, except for the Egyptians and the Canaanites. They are not related to Israel. That much is very, very clear in Genesis. And instead, what we hear about them is this, right? They're awful, they're terrible, they're morally corrupt in all of these various ways. And my sense of this is they had a narrative about themselves coming out of Exodus, coming out of Egypt. And there's a concern about their origins. Right? We're not the Egyptian. We want to make so clear that we are not Egyptian, lest anyone think that we are, just because, we came from there and our big leader guy is named Moses, which is an Egyptian name. We're not Egyptian. And also, the Bible is super concerned with saying we are not Canaanites, even though we know archaeologically, historically, that they really were. Right? Israelites are just Canaanites who sort of got up and moved to a different part of the country. So what I think we're seeing here is a kind of demonizing of the people that we used to be, just to make really clear what our identity is. Right? We are this is Israel defining itself against against the places where it narratively and historically came from. All that said, the material here is really awful. Like, this is an awful thing to say about another country. And there was a time when I couldn't even think of a particularly good contemporary parallel to this. I wasn't trying very hard. But now, today, I'm like, oh, what does it remind me of to have Israel saying, oh, our enemies over there, these guys, right? Like these guys, oh, they have sex with children. Right. And they have sex with their family members and they slaughter children. Right. It's QAnon. Right. It's like literally the exact thing that like the conspiracy theorists today are saying about, I guess, just Democrats. And that to me says a lot about the kind of the power of these particular kinds of offenses that you can slander someone with. This is about as bad as it can get.